Hey everybody, welcome to Chapter Book Storytime. We are continuing to read The Magic Misfits, the second story. Today we are on Chapter 8, but to recap, in yesterday's chapter, Layla and Carter spent some time together and they were kind of talking and thinking, what would I want to know if I could be psychic? What would I want to learn? Because they just met Sandra Santos, who works as a psychic. And so they're kind of thinking about it. And Layla's answer was that she would want to know more about her dad's past, Mr. Dante Vernon. She wants to know more about the Emerald Ring, which was his group of friends when he was young, and their magic club. Because she's feeling a little suspicious right now. First of all, we learned that Bibi Bazo was a member of her dad's club of friends, who we know turned out to not be a good guy, right? And now Sandra comes along, and she's an old friend of Mr. Vernon, but they haven't talked in years and years and years, and Layla's feeling a little suspicious of her, and she's wondering why her dad never told her about the Emerald Ring and his group of friends when he was a kid. So she said, if I were psychic, that's what I would want to be able to look back into the past and see. And then Carter said his answer was that he would want to use his psychic powers to find out what happened to his parents, because we still don't know what happened to them. They disappeared, and that's all we know. And so they told each other, well, we're not psychic, but let's work together. Let's help each other get these answers. So they made a deal to help each other find those answers to their questions. And then they were about to head home when they once again ran into Bibi Bazo's old monkey, and they weren't able to catch the monkey. The monkey got away, but they did tell Mr. Vernon when they got home that they had seen him, and they're starting to feel a little worried about the monkey. Mr. Vernon was talking about, calling animal control, and although this monkey used to belong to Bazo, who was not a good person, Layla and Carter, don't want anything bad to happen to this monkey. This monkey is scared and running around the town of Mineral Wells by itself, so they want to try to catch it and help it. So we'll see if they'll be able to. This monkey's really fast, so... and then finally, the very end of the chapter, they are setting up for their dinner party with Sandra Santos. So Sandra's coming over for dinner. So let's see what happens. All right, here we go. Chapter 8. As soon as Theo and Ridley arrived at the shop, Layla put them to work. We're arranging a Magic Misfits centerpiece for the dinner table. Layla was dressed in her straitjacket, though she'd left the sleeves untied so that she could carry items from the shop. Ridley looked skeptical. And why would we want to do that? In honor of 2 generations of magic clubs. Carter fanned out his hands like a showman. Layla added, plus, seeing how great our magic club is might get Dad and Sandra talking about the old Emerald Ring. Glancing around Vernon's magic shop made Layla suddenly nostalgic for the time she'd first arrived from Mother Margaret's home. Walking through that front door, as the little bell sounded over her head, Layla felt like she'd stepped into a wonderland she'd only read about in books. The high-ceilinged room contained every color of the rainbow. The window panes were painted bright purple and green. The rugs that covered the rickety wood floor swirled with ochre stripes and red dots and yellow lightning bolts. The glass jars, filled with toys and tricks, reflected sunlight, casting beams into the far corners of the room, catching the glitter embedded in the plaster walls. For a moment, on that first day, Layla had been certain that it was a dream she'd wake up from, in a way, as time passed, she had. Friends, you might already understand that it's impossible to live surrounded by such magic without it eventually feeling somewhat normal. Thankfully, her fathers were able to remind her how special she was simply by taking her into their lives and giving her the attention and love she deserved. The magic in the shop was the icing on an already delicious cake. Oh, so that's really nice. So she was thinking back to when because remember she was adopted, so she was thinking back to when she first came to Vernon's magic shop, and how magical it was. I mean, she's walking to this beautiful, colorful place filled with all of these like magician's tools, and remember she was already interested in magic, and so to her it was just like amazing, right? And so she was thinking back on it and how, you know, some of that initial magic had faded because it was normal now. She lived in that magic shop every day, so it wasn't as exciting to walk into it every day, right? And I think that's something that we can all relate to, but she said it didn't matter because her parents always reminded her of that magic just by taking such good care of her and loving her and reminding her how special she is. Sounds like a really good family. I like them. All right. The quartet gathered supplies for the shop's hidden nooks and secret drawers. Then they took the small service elevator upstairs to the dining room. Layla always giggled when she rode the elevator. How many people had an actual elevator inside their home? Layla laid the black top hat from the shop on its side in the middle of the long wooden table. The other misfits surrounded the hat with trick wands, playing cards, knotted ropes, feather flowers, whoopee cushions, tiny cups and foam balls, balloon animals, miniature human skulls made from clear plastic, rainbow-colored glass vials, and a plush green bird that looked like Presto. It appeared as if everything was spilling from the top hat like a magical horn of plenty. Layla placed her favorite candlesticks, cast iron and shaped like little witch boots, on either end, and then lit the tips of the tall white tapers. The light from the setting sun came through the gauzy curtains, and it, along with the glow from the candles, gave the dining room an aura of enchantment. "Perfecto," said Layla. "This'll get them talking." So she's hoping by decorating the table with all these cool magic tools and supplies that it'll get Mr. Vernon and Sandra talking about their old group, the Emerald Ring. Because remember, what's Layla trying to figure out? She's trying to learn more about the Emerald Ring and her dad's old group of friends. When Papa returned home from the resort, he brought Sandra Santos with him. Her white dress was festooned with giant red polka dots, and she'd pulled her hair up into a tight bun on top of her head. The same white star-shaped earrings dangled from her petite earlobes. According to fashion magazines, every fabulous woman had one or two signature accessories. The stars were Sandra's. She greeted the misfits with air kisses. "Oh my," she said when she saw the table spread. "Fabulous." Carter set the needle down on the record player on the sideboard, and playful jazz music danced around the room. "The Magic Misfits welcome you to dinner," said Layla with a little bow. "The best part is how all of this will magically return to the shop at the end of the night," said the other Mr. Vernon. Carter winked. "You won't even see it happen." Layla's papa brought out plates filled with steaming lobster mac and cheese, fried green tomatoes, Parmesan potatoes, and spaghetti squash with marinara. Everyone gathered at the table, their mouths watering as the other Mr. Vernon filled crystal glasses with fresh-made lemonade that glowed in the candlelight. "This all looks so good," said Sandra. "The best," said Theo, "as usual." "Thank you, Mr. Vernons," Ridley cried out. "Too bad Ollie and Izzy had to miss it," said Layla. "Yeah," said Ridley. "Too bad." "Dig in while it's hot." "Oh, dig in while it's hot," Layla's papa instructed. The sounds of silverware clacking against plates sounded out like chimes until Sandra interrupted. "Wait," and raised her glass. "First, a toast. To old friends." Mr. Vernon smiled, his thin black mustache decorating his top lip. "To old friends," he echoed. They all clinked glasses, took quick swigs, then got back to the task at hand, filling their bellies with delicious grub. "Oh, how I adored this old building as a child," Sandra mentioned as the other Mr. Vernon brought out a luscious key lime pie. "Remember the magic shows we put on for passerby? Or our endless games of hide and seek? Lyle would always win, Mr. Vernon said with a smile. He was quite good at vanishing. Layla noticed Carter beam at the thought of his father. The other Mr. Vernon cut everyone a piece of pie and passed them around as Sandra went on. Best of all, we'd stay up late telling secrets and making up stories, daring one another to guess which were true and which were lies. Let's play, said Layla, hoping to learn more about her secretive dad. Sandra glanced at Mr. Vernon as if to silently ask whether it was okay. He shrugged and then nodded. Okay, if you go first, Layla, he said. So they're going to play a game where you, where you tell a few secrets, and then, but not all of them are true. One is true and one is a lie, and then your friends guess which one is true. Let's see what Layla comes up with. Layla thought for a moment and then stood. When I first came to live in Mineral Wells, I was so amazed by my dad's and their shop and my new home, I was certain I'd wake up from the best dream ever. Well, that's obviously true, Ridley blurted out. You've told me that same line almost every week since we met. Layla shrugged and chuckled. My turn. I once won a soapbox derby contest by decorating my chair as a giant shark. That never happens, said Theo, or else we would have heard of it already. Ridley frowned. It'll happen one day, and you guys will help me put it all together. Let us invite Sandra to go next, said Theo. Surely, Sandra cleared her throat. When I was going through some of my mother's things in our old house, I discovered that she'd kept some drawings I'd done when I was young. I'd copied images from some playing cards that I really loved. I never knew she'd paid close attention to my interests. She was always working, you see. Finding the drawings again? She paused, as if collecting herself. Layla wanted to reach out and squeeze the woman's hands. I just miss my mother, I guess. That is all true, said Mr. Vernon, with a sad smile. Sandra perked up, shaking off her sudden melancholy, as if it were merely a slight coating of pixie dust. Who's next? I'll go, volunteered the other Mr. Vernon. Before it was a magic shop, this building was a jazz club. Totally false, Layla said. Actually, that's quite true, Mr. Vernon said. Dad, how could you not tell me? Layla asked, flustered. I suppose it never came up. Now you go, Dad. Me? Asked Mr. Vernon. Why me? Why not? Asked Carter, throwing a sly look at Layla. Mr. Vernon tossed his hands in the air, giving up. Okay then, secrets and stories. Truth and lies. Which will it be? Let us see. He leaned forward and stared intensely at each of his guests. Got one. As you all know, a long time ago I lived in this very apartment with my parents. Downstairs, my father established a little store that he called Vernon's Magic Shop. You see, my father was the original purveyor of the impossible. I loved watching him do magic tricks for the customers. I was most impressed when he'd transform one item into another right before their eyes. I begged him to teach me, but he refused, insisting that the best way to learn a trick was by figuring it out for myself. Mr. Vernon picked up the green bird plush that looked like Presto from the centerpiece and held it in his palm. And so I did. One day I decided to show my father what I had taught myself. I took his coffee mug, still holding some coffee, and placed it on a clean plate. Then I dropped a top hat on top of it, like so. Mr. Vernon placed the stuffed animal on the table and placed the centerpiece top hat over it. My father waited patiently as I waved my hand around the hat, like this, and said, "Abracadabra!" Then I lifted the hat from the counter, and the coffee mug was no longer there. Instead, a snow globe with a wintry scene of Mineral Wells sat in its place. My father was so proud. I remember clearly how he beamed at my self-earned ability. Little did he know, I broke his mug during the trick, which is why he never saw the mug again. But I've gotten quite a bit better since then. Mr. Vernon whipped the hat off the plate and the entire table yelped. Instead of the plush bird, presto, the very real parrot sat there and squawked at them. She bounced up and down as if impressed with herself. Mr. Vernon sat... She bounced up and down as if impressed with herself. Mr. Vernon set the hat back into the center of the table and held his finger out to the bird. The parrot stepped on it, and he brought her up to his shoulder. After a fluttering of wings, she perched there. "Now tell me, kids," said Mr. Vernon, "was that story the truth, or am I lying?" Carter knocked on the table, using Morse code to answer. Ridley burst into applause. "Very good, Carter." "It was the truth, Dad," Layla beamed. "The absolute truth." Mr. Vernon bowed his head, and the whole group broke into a round of applause. Layla felt giddy. Having Sandra here was actually working. Her dad had opened up about his past. Hopefully, this was only the beginning. "How did you do that, Mr. Vernon?" asked Theo. "Presto was in her cage downstairs when we came in." "I know how he did it," Carter said. "First you need a mechanism." "Indoculus privata loci," Mr. Vernon interrupted, holding a finger to his lips. "What's that supposed to mean?" asked Layla. "Are you trying to tell us some sort of new code?" Her dad motioned like he was zipping his lips, and then, with an invisible key, he pretended to lock them up tight. The other Mr. Vernon shook his head. "What have I told you about no animals or speaking Latin at the dinner table, Dante?" "Latin?" Layla echoed. "Since when do you know Latin?" But Mr. Vernon pretended he no longer heard her. Oh, excuse you. Where were they? "Can't we make an exception?" he asked to the other Mr. Vernon. "My old friend is here to visit." Sandra snickered. "You haven't changed one bit, Dante." You keep saying that, but haven't you noticed this?" Mr. Vernon ran his fingers through his thick and curly hair. "Completely white now." "Oh, stop," said the other Mr. Vernon. "We're still young." "No, we're still young," Carter said with a playful smile. "Young and full of vinegar." Theo and Ridley giggled. "It's all a state of mind," Sandra nodded. This pie. It makes me feel like I'm back in Florida in my old shop on the beach. People used to wander in for readings. They'd stay for hours chatting with me and drinking tea. That was one of my favorite times. Sometimes I wish life could still be as simple as that." "It can be if you want it," said Mr. Vernon. Do you still do readings?" asked Theo. "All the time. Would you like me to do some for you?" The kids clamored their approval. "I'm not sure if I'll compare to Dante's little story, but I'll try." Sandra clicked her tongue against the roof of her mouth and squinted. The room went silent as Sandra sat with her eyes closed for about 10 seconds. Then she whispered, "Running, running, running. The smell of smoke, the rush of a train. There are many trains, more than I can count. Counting, the shell game, a feeling of shame followed by escape." She straightened up and then said in a normal voice, "Does that mean anything to you, Carter?" Carter's eyes went wide. He glanced around the table at his friends. So she just tried to use her psychic abilities to do a reading for them, and she read one for Carter, and she was talking about running, trains, counting, and then an escape. Has anything like that ever happened to Carter before, where he was running away and then he got on a train and he escaped? Do you remember? All the way back from the very beginning of the first book. Carter's eyes went wide. He glanced around the table at his friends. Their mouths were open, all of them dumbstruck. Yeah, it does. Before I came to live with the Vernons, I traveled by train. A lot. And my uncle used to scam folks out of their cash with that horrible shell game. Sandra thought for a moment, then nodded. That time is over for you. Forever. Carter's eyes grew even wider as relief washed over him. Good to know, he said, smiling. What about me? Ridley said. Sandra rubbed her temples as she turned toward Ridley. Immediately, Sandra sneezed into her napkin. Stuffy noses and watery eyes, she whispered. Does that mean anything to you? Ridley shrugged. My parents have allergies. It's why I have to keep my pet rabbit here at the magic shop. She looked at Mr. Vernon and smiled. Thanks again for letting me. Any time, he answered. Sandra said, You will never suffer from them in the same way your parents do. Thank goodness. Ridley threw her hands into the air. One less thing to worry about. Layla could tell her friend was joking, but Sandra smiled as if Ridley's response was a success. Next, Sandra's eyes fell upon Theo. I hear many voices, she whispered. A house filled to the brim with voices. Theo looked confused. My brothers and sisters are all coming home to visit this summer. In just a few weeks. My mom and dad are really looking forward to it. They are, but you are not, said Sandra, pointing at him. Theo flushed. Well, I am, but sometimes when they're all together, I feel a little bit lost, Sandra said. Theo nodded. Music, she added. I hear music, too. I also play the violin, Theo confirmed. That will help you through any hard times that come your way. Stick with it. Oh, I will. My father is making me. Theo grinned as everyone laughed. When Sandra finally looked at Layla, Layla felt dizzy. But Sandra squinted, and Layla made herself smile wider than usual. She wanted to hear only good things. Footsteps, a knocking at a door, there's no answer. Thank goodness, Layla thought. That didn't mean anything to her. The room was unbearably quiet. A gift, Sandra added, almost as an afterthought. A key. Layla's heart jumped into her throat. Does this make sense? Do you remember Layla's prized possession? The one thing that was left with her when she was left at the orphanage, the one thing from her original parents? It was that key, right? Layla thought of the key on the string in the tin box, the one that she'd had since she was a baby. But she didn't want anyone to know about it. The secret made her feel strong. Still, she found that she couldn't lie to the woman. I think so. Mr. Vernon gave Layla a quizzical look, but he didn't pry. This key will become important in the coming days, said Sandra. Keep it close. Layla felt like she'd been struck by lightning. Hating the sudden attention, she changed the subject. Do you know that we can do tricks too? Theo, Ridley, Carter, and me? That's what Mr. Vernon tells me, Sandra said. Layla's voice rose. Carter, show Sandra what you can do. Carter picked up a spoon from the table. With a flick of his hand, the spoon disappeared. With his other hand, he reached beneath his plate and retrieved the spoon. Sandra gasped. That's quite good. Now, Theo, said Layla. Go on. Theo removed his magical violin bow from the pocket of his tuxedo pants and held it up over the centerpiece. Slowly, the top hat flipped upright and began to dance in a small circle around the table. Amazing, said Sandra. Bravo. Ridley shook her head. I'm not a circus monkey, and I do not perform on cue. For a moment, everyone thought she was really upset. But when she picked up her napkin and tossed it onto the table, it turned from white to bright blue instantly. "What trickery is this?" Ridley said with a wink. She picked up the napkin again and gave it a shake, and it turned green. "Stop it," she yelled at the napkin, and it turned red. Everyone laughed. "And don't forget Layla," said Carter. "She can escape from anything. Look, she's already wearing her straitjacket." "I'll just need to get my locks from my bedroom. Dad, can you help set me up?" "Escaping at the dinner table?" asked Mr. Vernon. "I'm not so sure about that." "Dad," Layla said, rolling her eyes. "This is a very good argument," Mr. Vernon said, snapping his fingers. "You talked me into it. Let's go." Sandra stood up from the table. "While you do that, would someone point me toward..." Sandra stood up from the table. "While you do that, would someone point me toward your powder room?" "It's in the same place it's always been," said Mr. Vernon, nodding toward the hallway. "We haven't done any remodeling since I inherited the building." "End of the hallway? I'd forgotten. It's been such a long time." Sandra thanked him and made her way down the dark passage. Whew, that was a long chapter. But that is the end of that chapter. And we learned a lot. So they had their dinner party with Sandra. Well, they're still having their dinner party with Sandra. But I think the most interesting thing for me was when Sandra kind of showed her skills. She used her psychic magic ability or tricks and was able to kind of read a little something about each of our magic misfits, right? She was able to talk about when Carter ran away from Uncle Sly. She was able to talk about Ridley and how her parents have really bad allergies, which we didn't even know about. And Theo and his family and all of his brothers and sisters. And then Layla. And when she got to Layla, she mentioned that key, that special key that was left with Layla when she was left at the orphanage as a baby. And Layla's always kept it a secret from all of her friends, and she liked it that way. But now, Sandra said that key is going to become very important in the coming days. I wonder in what way. How is that key going to become important? What do you think it unlocks? I don't know. Also, Layla was happy that she was able to get her dad talking about his past a little bit. We learned a little bit about Mr. Vernon's dad, Layla's grandpa. And so I think Layla's hoping to continue that conversation and learn more about her dad's past and what he was like as a kid. So that was a really long chapter. But now this chapter ended with Sandra heading to the bathroom. And then tomorrow on Monday or the next time, next time we'll do chapter 9. I'll see you then. Bye, everybody.